All right, let's jump right into this security explainer. I'm officially issuing a Code Ninja security advisory right now for a critical, highly active threat we're tracking. We're talking about CVE-2026-28318. Now, what this is an unauthenticated, single request kill switch, and it is actively targeting SolarWinds Serv-U managed file transfer systems right across the internet. Look, if you got Serv-U exposed to your perimeter, you are absolutely in the blast radius of this vulnerability. So the goal of this disclosure is to give you the exact mechanics of the exploit, the real-world impact, and the immediate mitigation protocols you need to force fixes and lock down your perimeter.
So we're looking at a CBSS 3.1 score of 7.5. That's a solid high severity. Under the hood, this is classed as a CWE 400 flaw, which basically just means uncontrolled resource consumption. But to put that into practical terms, an attacker doesn't need credentials, they don't need some complex multi-stage exploit chain, and they certainly don't need any user interaction. They literally just fire one maliciously crafted HTTP post request at your target service, and it reliably takes your entire Serv-U system offline. It's an incredibly effective, on-demand crash.
You know, the sheer speed of this threat escalation tells a pretty terrifying story all on its own. Let's look at the timeline. On June 3rd, 2026, the SolarWinds advisory drops. The very next day, June 4th, the CVE record goes public. And then, bam, June 5th, CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, slaps this right onto their known exploited vulnerabilities catalog, the KEV list. That immediately triggers a strict 14-day federal patch deadline for June 19th. I really need to emphasize how highly unusual this is. A pre-authentication denial of service bug almost never hits the CISA KEV list just one day after publication. CISA doesn't add to that list on severity alone, right? They require hard, verified evidence of active in-the-wild exploitation. Okay, before we dissect the actual technical payload, I want to pause for a deliberate tactical comms check. I need to make sure this channel is secure and that you, as a defender, are locked in and prepared to receive some critical, real-time threat intelligence. Are you receiving this intel loud and clear? Because what we're about to cover is exactly how the adversary is actively taking down these systems. Establishing a reliable link for this advisory, and honestly all future advisories, is just a strict security necessity at this point. So consider this your call to action. Subscribe to the Cybertech 79 channel right now to lock in your real-time intel feed. And I really need you to hit that like button to formally acknowledge receipt of this intelligence. When the perimeter is under fire, we absolutely have to know who's actively monitoring the wire. All right, ACK received, protocol engaged. Let's dig deep into the forensics and look at exactly what is broken here. The trigger for the whole thing is actually a simple HTTP header, Content-Encoding Deflate. When an attacker sends a post request carrying the specific header alongside any body content, they completely bypass some flawed safety checks. And why does that happen? Well, it's because HTTP compression is actually enabled by default on Serv-U's web server. So the system skips its safety check and just feeds the payload straight into an in-memory decompressor inside the RhinoNET HTTP layer. The problem is, the buffer management in this decompressor is fundamentally broken. It executes an invalid free command, which is essentially like trying to return a book to a library shelf that literally doesn't exist. Your operating system's hardened memory allocator catches this heap corruption, totally panics and aborts the entire Serv-U process just to save itself. And boom, the service crashes.
Now, as you probably know, anytime a white hat researcher hears the words heap corruption, alarm bells just go off, because that's very often the first rung on a ladder to a remote shell, remote code execution. So the big question is, are we looking at just a crash or a shell? Well, the elite team over at Bishop Fox did an incredible forensic deep dive into this, and they proved that this is strictly a denial of service. They aggressively chased down 3 separate paths trying to pop a shell. First, they tried tricking the program into discarding memory at a chosen address. Second, they tried faking a neighboring block of memory to corrupt the manager's internal bookkeeping. And third, they went after a totally separate counting bug inside the decompressor. But every single path hit a total dead end. Why? Because the bug's weird quirks forced the system to request impossibly large memory values, meaning the only 2 outcomes were either do absolutely nothing or destroy everything. There's no version of this bug you can aim. It's just a crash. So you might be wondering, if the heap corruption is boxed in and isn't going to yield a shell, why in the world is CISA treating this like a massive 5-alarm emergency? Well, it really comes down to this core truth. For managed file transfer systems, availability is the asset. Customers run Serv-U because they have critical batch file transfers that absolutely must land on schedule. We're talking settlement files for clearinghouses, claims files for healthcare, scheduled drops from defense contractors. A Serv-U service that crashes is a missed transfer window. And an on-demand crash, orchestrated by an attacker, that means a missed transfer window scheduled entirely by the adversary. That kind of disruption is just incredibly lucrative for attackers and utterly catastrophic for businesses.
And this brings us to a pretty brilliant analysis by security researcher Nefarious Plan, who hit the nail on the head. They noted, SolarWinds patched the path to the decoder, not the decoder. Let's actually critique the vendor's 15.54 hotfix 1 patch for a second. When you install this hotfix, it actually doesn't repair the broken decompressor in the RhinoNET.dll, not at all. Instead, SolarWinds just added a universal gate at the dispatcher level, so now if Serv-U sees a request with a body and a non-empty content-encoding header, it just rejects it outright with a 415 unsupported media type error. It prevents the malicious request from ever reaching the broken code. But make absolutely no mistake here. That long-running design debt, the actual broken decoder itself, is left completely intact in the binary. Knowing the reality of how this patch works, how do you actually defend your perimeter right now? Well, here is your strict mitigation protocol. Step 1, install hotfix 1 immediately to put that dispatcher gate in place. Step 2, if you can't patch right away for whatever reason, you've got to enforce this boundary yourself. Go straight to your web application firewall, your reverse proxy, or your load balancer and block or strip any inbound post requests carrying that Deflate header. Legitimate clients basically never send Deflate on a post anyway, so blocking it is totally safe. Step 3, sweep your perimeter. Because the hotfix returns a 415 error instead of crashing, Bishop Fox was actually able to build a safe detection tool that sweeps your network to identify vulnerable hosts without taking them down. Go grab it and run it.
This entire situation really highlights the ethics behind coordinated vulnerability disclosure. Users simply need to know how to protect their systems. A vague little vendor note just isn't going to cut it when we're dealing with active, in-the-wild exploitation targeting decades-old design debt and critical file transfer infrastructure. As a defender, you absolutely must understand the exact mechanics. You need to know that it's a Deflate header, that it's an unpatched decoder, and that it's an availability killer. Without that intel, you can't properly configure your WAFs or protect your environments effectively.
And that brings us to our final, provocative challenge to close out this explainer. Is your perimeter secure? Have you actively audited your managed file transfer exposure? Do you actually know what decoders are silently waiting for attacker input on your public-facing interfaces? Take this threat intel, deploy the mitigation protocol, and lock down your systems. This is your Code Ninja Security Advisory closing out. Stay secure.